The sunset cast a golden glow over the skyscrapers, painting the city in a dreamy light. From the top floor of Blake Enterprises headquarters, the city below seemed like a different world, one where everything could be bought if you had enough power. Alexander Blake stood by the window, holding a glass of red wine, gazing out without really seeing. At 38, he was the CEO of Blake Enterprises, one of the leading tech firms in the country. He'd built this empire from the ground up, and now it was the only thing in his life that remained rock solid. But tonight, something felt different. It wasn't the company's success or the billions flowing in it, was her, Audrey Sinclair, the woman who had managed to steal his heart, and now his empire. He was a man used to control, to having everything in his life perfectly arranged. But Audrey, Audrey was a different kind of challenge. They first met at one of his company's high-profile events, where she was invited as one of the top financial analysts he had brought in to help the company. From the moment he met her, Alexander felt an inexplicable pull. She wasn't like the others, who fawned over him or pretended to be impressed by his wealth and status. Audrey was different, calm, poised, and dare he say, it unbothered by his power. In fact, she seemed to be evaluating him, almost like she could see through him. Later that evening, after all the partners and investors had left, Audrey approached him. The lighting in the room was soft, casting a gentle glow on her features. She was stunning, of course, but it was something about her presence, something about the way she carried herself that drew him in. "You seem lost in thought," Audrey said, her voice cool and smooth, breaking the silence. Alexander turned to face her, his sharp blue eyes meeting her steady green ones. A faint smile tugged at his lips, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I'm just thinking about the future," he replied, his tone low but firm. Audrey didn't respond immediately. She simply observed him, her gaze unreadable. After a moment, she spoke again, her words sharp, almost provocative. "The future looks bright for you, Alexander, as long as you don't let the people around you get too close. Power, after all, doesn't share." Her words stung. He hadn't expected that from her, especially not someone he'd just met. He'd always believed that the key to his success was keeping everything under control, keeping those closest to him within his reach. But Audrey's challenge left him unsettled. Something about her demanding attention and respect. "You really think I can control everything?" Alexander asked, his voice quiet, with just a hint of curiosity. Audrey's lips curved into a small smile, and for a split second, there was a glimmer of something mischief, perhaps in her eyes. "Not everything, Alexander, but you've always tried." There was an unexpected tension between them. He'd known many people in his life, some out of admiration, others out of necessity. But Audrey, Audrey was different. Her calm confidence, her keen intelligence, it was as if she could see into the very core of him, and it intrigued him in a way he couldn't explain. The rest of the evening passed in a blur, but Alexander couldn't stop thinking about Audrey. Every moment he spent with her only deepened the mystery. She was beautiful, yes, but there was more. She was clever, powerful, unafraid of him, and for the first time, he realized that maybe he was the one who felt out of control. The following days passed in a blur of meetings and phone calls, but Alexander couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Blake Enterprises was doing well, better than ever, in fact, but something was off. He couldn't pinpoint it, but he knew something was slowly slipping through his fingers. It wasn't until late one night, while reviewing quarterly financial reports, that he noticed the discrepancies. Small at first, the numbers were just a little off, too many subtle errors for his comfort. He adjusted them, assuming it was just a mistake. But as the days passed, the errors grew more significant, more deliberate. It was like someone was trying to manipulate the financials from the inside. He picked up the phone and dialed his head of accounting, his tone colder than usual. "Meet me in my office in 20 minutes. We need to talk." As the minutes dragged on, Alexander's thoughts spiraled. Could Audrey be behind this? It seemed far-fetched, but it was the only explanation that made sense. She'd come into his life like a force of nature, challenging him, making him question everything he thought he knew about control. Could she have been playing him from the beginning? The door to his office opened, and Laura, his head accountant, walked in, her face pinched with concern. "What's going on, Alexander?" she asked, her voice laced with worry. "These numbers, ... they're not adding up." "I know," he replied, standing up from his desk, running a hand through his dark hair. "I need you to go over everything again. There are discrepancies in the reports, and I think someone's trying to sabotage us from within. I want a full audit, everything, top to bottom." Laura nodded and began to work through the numbers with a quiet intensity. As Alexander watched her, his thoughts drifted back to Audrey. He had trusted her. He had let her into his world, into his heart, and now he was beginning to wonder if that trust had been misplaced. The next day, as the tension in his office grew, Alexander decided to confront Audrey. He'd had enough. The manipulation, the lies, it needed to end now. He called her into his office, his pulse quickening as he waited. She arrived exactly on time, her calm composure never wavering. Audrey walked into the office like she owned the place, smooth, confident, with that same quiet power that had always intrigued him. But today, Alexander wasn't going to be distracted by her beauty or her charm. Today, he was going to find out the truth. "Close the door," he said as soon as she entered. His voice was firm, authoritative. Audrey did as instructed, then turned to face him. "What's this about, Alexander?" "I don't have all day." He stood from his desk, his eyes locking with hers. "I know what you've been doing. The financials are off. Discrepancies, leaks. And I know it's you. I don't know how you're doing it, but I know you're behind this." Audrey raised an eyebrow, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Is that so?" she asked, her tone almost a calm. "You really think I've been playing you, don't you?" "I don't think." "I know." His voice was low, filled with quiet fury. "I let you in. I trusted you. And now my empire is on the verge of collapse. All because of your betrayal." Audrey took a step closer, her gaze never leaving his. "Alexander, you're not seeing the bigger picture. You never do." She paused, letting the silence hang between them for a moment. "I didn't betray you. I'm freeing you. From yourself. What the hell are you talking about?" Alexander's patience was wearing thin. "You want control over everything, don't you? Over this company, over people's lives. You build your empire on power and fear, but you've never really controlled it. You've only been keeping it from falling apart. All I'm doing is speeding up the process." Alexander felt a cold rush of realization. She wasn't just trying to take over. She was trying to tear it all down, to make him face the truth about himself. That feeling of control he'd fought so hard for, it was all an illusion. "So this is your idea of a wake-up call? Destroying everything I've built?" he asked, his voice rising, fists clenching. Sometimes you have to destroy to rebuild, Audrey replied, stepping even closer, her voice a soft whisper. And if I have to destroy you to make you see it, then so be it. Alexander's heart pounded in his chest. The woman he had once loved, the woman he had trusted, was standing before him, dismantling his world piece by piece. Is this some kind of game to you? He spat. It was never a game, Alexander, Audrey said, her voice now hard as steel. You were the one playing, and I was just the one who made sure you played by the right rules. Just when Alexander thought he had it figured out, Audrey dropped a bombshell that left him speechless. You're not the only one who's been keeping secrets. Alexander, she said, her eyes glinting with something dark. Your father, he wasn't the man you thought he was. The empire you've built, it's based on stolen secrets, blackmail, and manipulation. Everything you have is tainted. His mind reeled. What are you talking about? Audrey stepped back, a shadow crossing her face. Your father, he was involved in deals with people you wouldn't want to know about. And I've known for years. I was trying to help you, but you never wanted to see it. You were always so blinded by your own ambition. Audrey's words hung in the air long after she left, leaving Alexander alone with the crushing weight of betrayal and the truth he had always ignored. Everything he had worked for, everything he had built, was founded on lies. He sat at his desk, staring at the papers in front of him, knowing that the future of Blake Enterprises and his own future was on the line. But as much as he hated the truth, as much as he wanted to deny it, he knew one thing for certain. Audrey had already won. The days that followed Audrey's confession felt like a blur to Alexander. He could no longer trust anyone. Every interaction, every decision, seemed like a potential betrayal, a step closer to the unraveling of everything he had spent years building. But despite the weight of what he had learned, there was still one thing he couldn't shake: the need to win. The need to prove that he wasn't just a puppet in Audrey's game. That evening, Alexander sat in his office, the lights of the city twinkling below like a reflection of his thoughts, chaotic, scattered, uncertain. The paperwork in front of him blurred into a mess of numbers and contracts, but his mind kept returning to one thing. Audrey, her words haunted him. His father, the man he had revered and based his entire business on, had been involved in deals that were far darker than Alexander could ever have imagined. The empire he thought he was building on hard work and skill had instead been constructed on lies and manipulation. But even more unsettling was the realization that Audrey wasn't just trying to take control of the company she had been playing a much bigger game all along. She wasn't after power for power's sake. She was after something deeper, something personal. He couldn't let her win. He couldn't just sit back and watch his empire crumble, no matter how much damage Audrey had already caused. He had to strike back. Now, with renewed resolve, Alexander summoned his trusted team. The next few hours were a blur of strategy, late-night phone calls, and urgent emails. He needed to take back control of Blake Enterprises before Audrey could finalize her plans. But more than that, he needed to expose her, to show everyone that she was not the person they thought she was. The following morning, Alexander called for an emergency meeting with his board of directors. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, waiting for the right time to act. He knew Audrey was likely already one step ahead, but he couldn't afford to wait any longer. He had to move first. As the members of the board filed into the conference room, Alexander stood at the front, his usual calm composure masking the storm brewing inside him. He had to keep it together. He couldn't let his emotions show. Not now. "Thank you for coming at such short notice," he began, his voice steady but commanding. "There have been some developments that require immediate attention. I've uncovered discrepancies in our financial records that suggest sabotage from within the company." A murmur ran through the room. The tension in the air was palpable. Sabotage. One of the board members, Carl Harris, asked, his tone skeptical. Who would want to sabotage the company? Alexander's eyes narrowed. That's what we need to find out. I believe it's someone within the company. Someone who's been using their position to manipulate data and misdirect our financial strategies. The board members exchanged nervous glances. Alexander could see the uncertainty in their eyes. Some of them were loyal, some were opportunistic. He didn't trust any of them completely. But he knew he had to rely on them, at least for now. I'm launching an internal investigation, he continued, his voice cutting through the room. And I need full transparency from each of you. We cannot afford any more secrets. Just as the meeting seemed to be calming down, Audrey walked into the room. Her entrance was flawless, as always. She glided into the room, her heels clicking sharply on the polished floor, her presence commanding. Everyone in the room turned to her, and Alexander's pulse quickened. She knew exactly how to make an entrance, how to control the room without saying a word. "Good morning, everyone," Audrey said smoothly, her voice like silk. She turned to Alexander, a smile playing on her lips. "I see you're already making plans. How proactive of you." Alexander's jaw clenched. He couldn't let her get the upper hand here. "Not again, Audrey," he said, his voice cold. "I trust you're aware of the financial discrepancies I've just mentioned." She nodded, unfazed. "Of course, but I also know that you're being played, Alexander. The sabotage you're talking about. It's a diversion. Someone is manipulating you into thinking it's all about the money, when in reality, it's much bigger than that." Alexander's heart skipped a beat. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about your father," Audrey said, her eyes gleaming with a mix of triumph and disdain. "The same man who built this empire on lies and corruption. He's the one who started this whole mess. He set the foundation, and now you're living in it. You're just too blind to see it." Alexander felt the ground shift beneath his feet. The pain of what Audrey was saying hit him hard, but he forced himself to remain composed. "This isn't about my father, Audrey. It's about you. You've been pulling the strings all along, and I'm going to find out exactly how far this goes." Audrey tilted her head slightly, her smile widening. "You think you can stop me, Alexander? You can't even control your own company, let alone me." Before he could respond, Audrey turned and left the room, her heels clicking sharply against the floor, leaving a trail of cold air in her wake. The meeting ended soon after Audrey's exit, but Alexander's mind was racing. He couldn't shake the feeling that Audrey knew something he didn't. She wasn't just playing a game of corporate sabotage. She was playing a much deeper, more dangerous game. And he was only just beginning to understand the rules. After the meeting, he called Laura, his head accountant, into his office. "I need everything," he said, his voice firm. "I need access to the full financial records, every contract, every email, every deal. I need to know exactly what Audrey's been doing behind the scenes." Laura nodded, but there was something in her eyes that made Alexander pause. "Are you sure you want to do this, sir?" Audrey's not just a part of the company. She's been here almost as long as you have. I'm sure, he said, his voice cold. I'm done playing by her rules. As Laura began pulling together the files, Alexander sat back in his chair, his mind spinning with the possibility that Audrey was more dangerous than he had ever imagined. The more he uncovered, the more it became clear this was no longer just a fight for control of Blake Enterprises. This was a war one that Audrey had been waging for years, and Alexander had just become her latest casualty. Days passed, and Alexander's frustration only grew. The deeper he dug into the company's records, the more complex the web Audrey had spun around him seemed to become. Every time he thought he was gaining ground, another layer of deceit would surface, leaving him questioning everything he had built and everything he had believed. He couldn't stop thinking about what Audrey had said about his father. The empire he had inherited wasn't just a business. It was built on secrets, blackmail, and manipulation. And now Audrey had entangled herself within it, pulling the strings from the inside, making him question if he had ever truly been in control. But there was no time for introspection. Every hour that passed was an hour closer to the company's collapse, and Audrey was right, she was one step ahead. Alexander needed to outmaneuver her. He needed a plan, and he needed it fast. As the pressure mounted, Alexander found himself in an unlikely meeting. Late one night, after a grueling day of sifting through records and finding more pieces of Audrey's puzzle, he received an unexpected call. It was from Elliot Hayes, a former business partner of his father, now estranged from both Alexander and the company. Elliot had always been a shady character in the business world, and Alexander had never fully trusted him. But desperation makes strange bedfellows. I know what's going on. Alexander, Elliot said on the phone, his voice low and filled with knowing. And I can help you, if you're willing to listen. Elliot's offer was simple. He could provide information on Audrey's dealings with several international investors, many of whom had shady ties to illegal business practices. This wasn't just about sabotage anymore. This was about exposing Audrey's true intentions and making sure she paid for what she'd done. You've got to understand, Elliot, Alexander said, leaning back in his chair. I can't trust anyone right now. Not after everything that's happened. I know, Elliot replied, his voice almost sympathetic. But I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for your survival. It was a hard pill to swallow, but Alexander knew that he had no other choice. Elliot had always been in the know when it came to the darker side of business. He knew how to navigate the treacherous waters of corporate espionage. And if there was anyone who could help him take down Audrey, it was Elliot. With Elliot's help, Alexander began to uncover more about Audrey's operations. She had been using Blake Enterprises as a cover for laundering money, working with international criminals to funnel vast sums of money into shell companies that were hidden in plain sight. But what Alexander found next was even more shocking. Audrey was planning a hostile takeover of Blake Enterprises using its own assets against it. It wasn't just about the company anymore. Audrey was using Blake Enterprises as a pawn in a much larger game. She planned to sell the company's most valuable assets to the highest bidder, all while destroying Alexander's reputation in the process. If she succeeded, she would walk away with everything, money, power, and the empire that Alexander had spent his entire life building. But as Alexander learned more, a deeper, darker truth began to emerge. Audrey wasn't just after Blake Enterprises. She was after him. She had been playing the long game. And all of this his father's secrets the company's downfall. Their tumultuous relationship was leading to one final confrontation. With the pieces falling into place, Alexander felt like he was finally ready to confront Audrey. He had evidence now, hard evidence of her crimes, and it was time to put an end to this. He called her to his office for what would be the most important meeting of his career. When Audrey arrived, her usual calm confidence was still in place. She walked into the room like she owned it, and for a moment, Alexander thought back to their first meeting when she had challenged him, made him question his every move. "I've been expecting you," she said, her tone smooth and almost mocking. "I assume you've come to talk business." "More than that," Alexander replied, his voice colder than ever. "I've come to take back what's mine." He placed the files on the desk, the evidence of her financial crimes laid out before her. For the first time, Audrey's calm demeanor faltered, but only for a moment. "You've been busy," she said, almost with admiration in her voice. "But you still don't get it, do you?" "What are you talking about?" Alexander snapped, his patience wearing thin. "I don't want Blake Enterprises." "Alexander," Audrey replied, her eyes flashing with something dangerous. "I never did. What I wanted was you." Before Alexander could react, she revealed the final twist. "You're not the only one with secrets. Your father's not the only one who built his empire on lies." The words hit Alexander like a punch to the gut. "What are you talking about?" Audrey smiled a cold, knowing smile. "I'm not just here to take you down, Alexander. I'm here to make sure you pay for everything your family has done to mine. You think you're the only one who's been wronged. I've been biding my time, waiting for the right moment too, with everything coming to light." The final battle between Alexander and Audrey became inevitable. She wasn't just an opponent anymore. She was a force of nature, determined to bring him down no matter the cost. And as much as Alexander hated to admit it, she had played him at his own game. But he wasn't done yet. With Elliot's help, he launched a counteroffensive, targeting the financial networks Audrey had used to control the company's assets. He wasn't going to just sit back and let her win. The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, legal action, and corporate warfare. The world of high finance had never seen anything like it. Alexander fought back, using every resource at his disposal to expose Audrey's operations and wrest control of Blake Enterprises from her dot. As the battle reached its peak, Audrey made one final, unexpected move. She disappeared. Her contacts disappeared. The money she had funneled into secret accounts vanished without a trace. Alexander thought he had one, but when he woke up the next morning, the news was everywhere. Audrey was gone, so was the money. She had left him with nothing, and as Alexander stood in his office, looking out over the city, he realized something. Audrey had won, but not in the way he expected. She hadn't just taken his empire. She had left him with nothing but a shattered identity, forced to rebuild from the ashes of the empire he had once called his own. The city seemed different, now darker, more distant. The lights below twinkled like stars, but they no longer felt like symbols of success. Alexander sat at his desk, staring at the empty chair across from him where Audrey had sat, where they had shared their moments of trust and betrayal. The war was over, and he had lost more than just the company. He had lost his sense of self, his control over his own fate. But in the silence that followed, something changed within him. The anger, the disbelief began to simmer down, replaced by something else, a cold determination. He couldn't go down like this, not after everything he had worked for. The pieces of his empire were scattered, but he was still standing. And that was something Audrey hadn't counted on. The next few days were a blur of legal battles and empty promises. The company was in freefall, its value plummeting as the truth about Audrey's manipulation came to light. But Alexander had a plan, a new vision for what Blake Enterprises could be. He wasn't going to let Audrey's actions define him. The future of the company rested in his hands, and he wasn't about to lose it. He began reaching out to old allies, people he had long forgotten. Some of them were enemies now, but in this world, alliances were fluid, especially when survival was at stake. He needed to reassemble his team, find a way to rebuild what Audrey had torn apart. But there was something else that kept haunting him, the truth about his father. Audrey's words echoed in his mind, reminding him that his father's empire had been built on lies. But what did that really mean? Was everything he'd learned about his family a legacy of hard work, success, and power, just another illusion? Late one evening, as Alexander sat in his penthouse overlooking the city, he received a package. There was no return address, just a simple envelope with his name on it. He hesitated for a moment before opening it, the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. Inside, there was a letter and a set of old photographs of his father in meetings with people Alexander had never seen before. Faces that looked sinister. The letter was brief, but it shattered everything Alexander thought he knew. If you want to know the truth about your father, you'll find it in the records at Harrow Bank. Your father's dealings were not as clean as you think. The letter was unsigned. There were no clues to who had sent it, but the message was clear. The truth about his father was buried, and Alexander was the only one who could uncover it. The bank mentioned in the letter, Harrow Bank, was notorious for handling the financial dealings of some of the most corrupt individuals in the world. And now Alexander realized his father had been part of that world. The empire Alexander had inherited wasn't built on noble ideals, it was built on backroom deals and secretive transactions. He knew what he had to do next. Alexander flew to Harrow Bank the next day. The institution was an imposing fortress of glass and steel, standing tall in the heart of the financial district. It had a reputation for keeping its clients' secrets safe, but Alexander wasn't looking for secrecy anymore. He was looking for the truth. He was led to a private vault deep within the building, where the bank kept confidential documents for its most influential clients. The vault was locked with a combination, but the old man at the front desk handed Alexander the key without question. He had no idea who Alexander was, but the bank was used to clients with secrets. They didn't ask questions. Inside the vault, Alexander found exactly what he was looking for: detailed financial records of his father's dealings, dating back decades. It wasn't just the company that was built on lies, it was everything. The bank records showed that Alexander's father had been involved in money laundering, embezzling funds from public projects, and even financing illegal arms deals. As he sifted through the documents, one name stood out above all others: Adrian Black, the man who had once been Alexander's greatest rival in the industry. His father had made a deal with Adrian long before Alexander had ever heard of him. Adrian had been involved in the shady deals that had funded much of the company's early growth. And now it seemed like the past had come back to haunt him with this newfound knowledge. Alexander knew he had to confront Adrian. There was no other option. He needed to know the full extent of his father's involvement with Adrian and what that meant for the future of Blake Enterprises. But when he called Adrian to arrange a meeting, he was met with an unexpected response. Adrian wasn't interested in talking business. Instead, he made a surprising offer: an alliance. You've been played, Alexander, Adrian said over the phone. Audrey wasn't the only one manipulating you. I had my hand in this too, as your father did. But now I see you as more than just an enemy. You and I could run this town together. Forget about Audrey. Forget about the company. We can build something even greater than your father ever dreamed of. It was an offer laced with danger. But Adrian's words struck a chord in Alexander. He'd been fighting against Audrey, trying to reclaim what she had taken from him. But now, Adrian's proposition presented a new opportunity, one that could put him back in control. Adrian's offer wasn't just about business. It was about power. He wanted to use Alexander's knowledge of Blake Enterprises to infiltrate the remaining weaknesses Audrey had left behind. But to do that, Alexander would have to make a choice, betray his father's legacy once again. This time by joining forces with the very man who had helped tear it apart as he sat in his penthouse later that night. Staring at the papers in front of him, Alexander's mind raced. Audrey had played him like a puppet, but Adrian wasn't much better. Was the fight for control even worth it anymore? Could he trust anyone? Could he really keep rebuilding his empire? Was it time to burn it all down? For the first time since Audrey's betrayal, Alexander found himself questioning the only thing he had always believed in: power. The city lights flickered below Alexander's penthouse, but inside, the room felt colder than ever. The weight of his choices pressed heavily on his chest. The quiet hum of the city outside only emphasizing the growing silence within. Audrey had outplayed him at every turn, and now Adrian Black, his father's old adversary, was extending a hand in what could either be his salvation or his final downfall. He had spent days turning Adrian's offer over in his mind. He had walked away from every opportunity to accept Adrian's alliance, but the more he thought about it, the more tempting it became. Adrian's power, his connections, his knowledge of the shadows of the business world, it was a tempting proposition for a man who was desperate to hold on to what little remained of his empire. But there was a cost to every alliance, every partnership, and Alexander knew that no matter how much Adrian offered, there would always be strings attached. Betrayal was Adrian's specialty, and no amount of wealth or power could guarantee loyalty. It wasn't just the company at stake anymore. It was his soul, and that was something that no amount of money could buy back. Just as Alexander was about to make his decision, a familiar knock echoed through his door. He knew exactly who it was. "Come in," he called out, his voice heavy. The door opened to reveal Laura, his head accountant and longtime confidant. She was carrying a thick folder, her face pale with a mixture of concern and urgency. "Alexander," she began, her voice low, "you need to see this." He gestured for her to sit, watching her as she placed the folder on his desk. The tension in the air was palpable. "What is it?" Alexander asked, leaning forward. "It's about Audrey," Laura replied, her eyes darting to the folder before meeting his gaze. "I've been looking into her activities, and there's more going on than you think. She's not just after your company. She's been making deals behind your back with people. Dangerous people." Alexander's pulse quickened. Dangerous people? His mind raced through possibilities, but nothing he had discovered so far compared to this. "Show me," he demanded. Laura opened the folder, revealing a series of documents and photographs. The first document was a list of people who had been connected to Audrey's secret transactions. Some were known in the financial underworld, others were black market arms dealers, and a few were outright criminals with no visible business connections. This is how she was planning to take control. Alexander, Laura explained, by using Blake Enterprises as a front. She was working with these people to funnel money into illegal operations, laundering funds to cover her tracks. But that's not the worst part. Laura flipped the page. The next image was a grainy photograph of Audrey with Adrian Black, deep in conversation at a secluded hotel. They were both smiling, too comfortably like old friends who shared more than just business interests. Adrian, Alexander whispered, his worst fears coming to life. They were planning something together. Laura continued, her voice steady but filled with concern. It looks like Audrey was going to hand over full control of Blake Enterprises to Adrian in exchange for a larger cut of the operations she was involved in. And I think that's why she betrayed you. She needed to clear the way for him. The room felt like it was closing in on him, betrayal, lies, his father's involvement in illegal deals. And now this the truth, that Audrey had been playing him the entire time. She hadn't just wanted control of the company. She had been building an empire of her own with Adrian, using Blake Enterprises as a stepping stone. For a moment, everything stood still. The weight of the information crashed down on Alexander, and he felt a flood of emotions, anger, betrayal, but most of all, a deep sense of regret. He had failed to see what was right in front of him. Audrey's betrayal wasn't about power. It was about taking what was his and using him as a pawn in a game he never even knew was being played. Laura broke the silence. What are you going to do now? Alexander didn't answer immediately. His mind was still reeling, his thoughts a whirlwind. But something inside him hardened. He couldn't let Audrey and Adrian win. He couldn't let them tear down everything he had built. Blake Enterprises wasn't just a company, it was his life's work. And he wasn't going to let anyone take it from him. I'm going after them, he said, his voice quiet but filled with determination. I'm not going to let them use me anymore. But how? Laura asked, uncertainty creeping into her tone. I have one last card to play, Alexander replied, his eyes cold. I've been holding on to something that could expose Adrian. He thinks he's untouchable, but he's wrong. I know where his vulnerabilities lie. If I use this against him, I can turn the tables. And once I do, I'll take back everything, including Audrey. The next evening, Alexander arranged to meet with Adrian. This time, there would be no subtlety. He had gathered enough evidence to destroy Adrian's reputation, enough leverage to turn the tables completely. When Adrian walked into the private meeting room, the familiar arrogance was evident in his stride. Good evening, Alexander. Adrian greeted him with that trademark smirk. I trust you're ready to talk business. You're right, Alexander said, his voice low. But tonight, it's not about business. It's about survival. Adrian's smile faltered, but only for a moment. What are you playing at? I have the power to ruin you, Adrian, Alexander said, pulling out a set of documents that detailed Adrian's illegal dealings, money laundering, black market arms trading, and more. Everything you've been doing, everything you've been hiding, it's all here. You've been using me, using Blake Enterprises as a cover for your illegal operations. And now, I'm going to expose you. Adrian's face darkened, but he didn't show fear. You think you can threaten me with this? You think this will change anything? It's not a threat, Alexander said. It's a promise. Adrian's gaze sharpened. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into, Blake. This isn't just business. This is a war, and you're not prepared for it. Alexander didn't flinch. "I'm done being played, Adrian. I'm coming for you, and when I do, I'll make sure you lose everything." Adrian's smirk returned, but there was something else in his eyes, now a hint of respect, maybe even fear. "We'll see about that." The next few days felt like a whirlwind. Alexander's mind was consumed with one goal: taking down Adrian Black and reclaiming Blake Enterprises. He had always known business was a game of power and manipulation, but now it was personal. Audrey's betrayal had made it clear that nothing, no one was off limits in this ruthless world. He was done playing by the rules. It was time to make his move. Alexander knew that he couldn't take on Adrian head-to-head in a direct confrontation. Adrian was too powerful, too connected. But he had one advantage: information. Adrian's dark dealings were out in the open now, and if Alexander used it right, it could be enough to ruin Adrian's reputation and strip him of the power he had amassed over the years. But to do that, Alexander needed a plan, and a plan meant going deeper into Adrian's world. The next step in Alexander's plan was to get to the heart of Adrian's empire. He knew that in order to win, he needed to outsmart him. He needed someone who could get him the inside track on Adrian's operations. That's when he thought of Marcus Vale, a former associate of Adrian's, who had distanced himself from Adrian years ago after a falling out. Marcus had been in Adrian's inner circle, and Alexander knew that if he could get to Marcus, he might just learn the key to Adrian's downfall. Alexander reached out to Marcus, who was now running a small but growing investment firm. It wasn't easy to get him to meet, but when the stakes were high, you did what you had to. The meeting took place in a quiet, upscale restaurateur, neutral location that Alexander knew Marcus would feel comfortable in. As he waited for Marcus to arrive, Alexander couldn't help but think about how far he had fallen from the man he once was. Once, he had been the ambitious young CEO, determined to build something lasting, something real. But now, he was surrounded by shadows fighting for his empire in a world of lies and betrayal. When Marcus finally arrived, he wasted no time. He was a tall, lean man with a sharp face and even sharper eyes. There was an air of caution about him. But there was also something else, something that suggested Marcus had a score to settle with Adrian. "You've got a lot of nerve, coming to me after everything," Marcus said, his voice low but steady. "But I know what's at stake for you, and I know what Adrian is capable of." "I'm not here for a lecture," Alexander replied. "I need your help. I know you know Adrian better than anyone else, and I need to know how to take him down." Marcus looked around before leaning in, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Adrian's not just some business rival, Alexander. He's playing a dangerous game. He's connected to people you don't want to be involved with, but I know where his vulnerabilities lie, and I'll help you on one condition." Alexander leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "What do you want?" "I want a clean slate," Marcus said. "Adrian's business has cost me more than I'm willing to admit. Help me make sure he's taken down, and I'll give you everything you need to bring him down." With Marcus's information, Alexander began to build the case against Adrian. The more he dug, the more he realized how deep Adrian's network ran. The evidence Marcus provided, combined with the financial records from Harrow Bank, was a ticking time bomb. Adrian's criminal ties were far more extensive than Alexander had thought, and the truth was damning. But as the final pieces of the puzzle came together, Alexander learned something else. Audrey wasn't done yet. She was still in the game, still trying to exert control over what little remained of Blake Enterprises. She hadn't vanished as he'd hoped. She was plotting her next move, and it was clear that she was still working with Adrian in secret. The war between them had only escalated, and now Alexander was facing a battle on two fronts. He couldn't afford to let Audrey get the upper hand, not after everything she had already taken from him. Determined to take control of the situation, Alexander reached out to Audrey. He knew it was risky, but he needed to confront her directly. She was too dangerous to be left unchecked, and he had learned enough to know that Audrey had been orchestrating things from the shadows. They met in one of Blake Enterprises' top conference rooms. Audrey walked in with her usual composed demeanor, her sharp green eyes studying him carefully. There was no hesitation in her step. She was used to getting what she wanted, and she knew how to navigate the world of power and manipulation. "You're still playing games, Alexander," Audrey said, her tone cool. "What is it that you want from me this time?" "I'm done with your games, Audrey," Alexander replied, his voice steady. "I've learned everything I need to know. You were never after Blake Enterprises, you were after me. And now you've allied yourself with Adrian. You've played me, and now it's over." Audrey's lips curled into a faint smile. "You still don't get it, do you? This isn't just about me, or you, or Blake Enterprises. This is about power. I've been in control this entire time, Alexander. You just haven't been paying attention." "I'm paying attention now," Alexander said, his voice hardening. "And you won't get away with it. I have the evidence, Audrey. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what you've been up to." Audrey's smile faded. "You really think you can take me down? You've been playing catch-up the whole time, and now you think you can win." "It's too late. I'm not playing anymore," Alexander said, his voice cold. "You're going to pay for what you've done." Just as the tension between them reached its peak, the door to the conference room opened, and Adrian Black walked in, his presence like a shadow descending over them. Audrey's eyes flickered with surprise, but her expression quickly returned to its usual calm. Adrian had been waiting for this moment, waiting for Alexander to make his move, so he could claim victory for himself. "Did you really think you could take me down, Alexander?" Adrian said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You've been trying to play the game without understanding the rules. But it's too late now. You've lost." Alexander's heart sank. He had been so focused on Audrey, he hadn't seen Adrian's hand in all of this. Adrian had been watching, waiting, just as Audrey had. The battle for control had reached its final stage, and Alexander realized that he might have underestimated just how far they were willing to go to bring him down. But there was still one thing left to do: fight back. The atmosphere in the conference room was thick with tension. Alexander stood in front of Audrey and Adrian, his mind racing. He had walked into this meeting hoping to catch them off guard, but now he was surrounded. He had underestimated just how deeply both of them were intertwined in his life and in Blake Enterprises. Adrian's cold smirk widened as he locked eyes with Alexander. "You think you can outplay me?" he asked, his voice mocking. "You should have known better, Blake. This game, it's mine to win." Audrey, her eyes gleaming with confidence, crossed her arms. "You always were so predictable, Alexander. You think you can fight me with documents and evidence. You should have realized power doesn't come from paper. It comes from control, from knowing how to make people do what you want them to do." Alexander's grip tightened on the folder in his hand. The one containing all the evidence that could destroy Adrian and Audrey's empire of lies. But suddenly, it didn't seem like enough. The stakes were too high. This wasn't just about exposing them anymore, it was about survival. His survival, just when Alexander thought he had no more cards to play. The door swung open behind him, and his heart stopped. It was Laura's trusted accountant, the one person he had counted on the most during this war. But now, standing in the doorway with a strange, unreadable expression, her face looked anything but trustworthy. "Laura?" he asked, his voice thick with suspicion. Her eyes flickered briefly between Audrey and Adrian before she spoke. "I'm sorry, Alexander. I never wanted it to come to this." Alexander's stomach twisted. "What are you talking about?" With a slow, deliberate step, Laura entered the room and closed the door behind her. "I had no choice. I tried to protect you, but they have too much on me. Audrey, Adrian. They promised me something I couldn't refuse." Audrey's eyes sparkled with triumph as she stepped forward. "You see, Alexander, it was always about control. And you, well, you've been losing control for a while now." For a split second, Alexander's heart stopped. You were in on this from the beginning." Laura's gaze dropped to the floor, her face tinged with shame. "I didn't want to, but they forced me. Your empire was crumbling, Alexander. The company was losing money, and you were too blind to see it. I couldn't let it fall apart without securing my future." "I'm sorry." Audrey's laughter echoed through the room, cruel and triumphant. "The most important lesson you'll ever learn, Alexander, is that loyalty is a currency. And I'm always willing to pay for it teshly when the price is your downfall." Everything Alexander had fought forth, the company, his reputation, his trust in the people around him, felt like it was slipping through his fingers. His hands clenched into fists, and his jaw tightened with rage. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was the ultimate betrayal. But in that moment of despair, something inside him shifted. He wasn't going to let them win. He wasn't going to let Audrey and Adrian destroy everything he had built. There had to be a way to turn the tables, even if it seemed impossible. "I'm not finished yet," Alexander said, his voice low but filled with deadly intent. "I still have one last move to make." Adrian raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "What could you possibly do now?" "You've lost, Alexander. This is over." But Audrey was looking at him differently now, as if seeing him for the first time. "Don't make the mistake of thinking you can outsmart me, Alexander. I've always been one step ahead." That was the mistake Audrey made. As Adrian and Audrey stood there, relishing their perceived victory, Alexander's mind began to work at lightning speed. He had one more ace up his sleeve, an ace neither of them would expect. The files that Laura had handed over were only part of the picture. Adrian had been far more involved in the illegal operations of Blake Enterprises than anyone had imagined. But what he hadn't realized was that Alexander had kept one last piece of evidence hidden. One piece that could destroy everything Adrian had worked for. Adrian had been laundering money through multiple shell companies. The funds had been funneled into a trust account that no one knew about. It was through that trust that Adrian had paid off politicians, criminals, and corporate insiders to keep his empire afloat, and Alexander had the key to unlock it all. The last transaction, the proof, the final nail in Adrian's coffin. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a tablet. "You're right, Audrey. I have lost, but this isn't over." With a few taps, he brought up the encrypted file. You thought you controlled everything, every deal, every person, but you didn't count on one thing. Both Adrian and Audrey moved closer, their eyes narrowing as they saw the evidence on the screen. Adrian's face hardened as he saw the final transaction, the one that would bring his entire criminal network crashing down. "You see, Adrian," Alexander said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I've been keeping a backup plan for months. You think you've outsmarted me. You've made a fatal mistake. You never accounted for the one thing that could ruin you." Adrian's jaw clenched as he realized what Alexander was doing. "You think that's enough to stop me?" "Not stop you," Alexander said. "I'm going to take you down. Everything you've built, all your power, all your wealth, it's over, within hours." The entire criminal network Adrian had worked to build was exposed. Law enforcement moved in quickly, arresting the key players in Adrian's empire, including several of his trusted allies. The media caught wind of the scandal, and soon the entire world knew what had been happening behind closed doors. Adrian was arrested, his assets frozen, his name forever tarnished. He had no one to turn to. The power he had once wielded so effortlessly had been stripped from him in the blink of an eye. Audrey, on the other hand, didn't fare much better. Though she had managed to escape the immediate fallout, her reputation was in shambles. The trust she had built with the business world was shattered, and no one would do business with her anymore. With both Audrey and Adrian out of the picture, Alexander was left standing amidst the rubble of what had once been Blake Enterprises. The company had been severely damaged, but Alexander had learned one critical lesson. Power wasn't about control. It wasn't about manipulating others to do your bidding. Power was about resilience. It was about knowing when to fight and when to walk away. As he walked through the company's headquarters, Alexander knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Rebuilding would take time, trust, and an entirely new approach to leadership. But he was determined to make it work. Blake Enterprises wasn't just about wealth, it was about creating something that mattered. And this time, Alexander would do it right. The dust had settled. The legal battles, the betrayals, and the underhanded dealings were over. But for Alexander, the real work was just beginning. Blake Enterprises, once a titan of the industry, lay in ruins. Its reputation was shattered, its future uncertain. But Alexander was determined to rebuild not just the company, but himself. He spent weeks meeting with investors, reassessing the company's structure, and drafting a new vision. It wasn't going to be easy. People in the business world had short memories and even shorter attention spans. But Alexander knew that trust was the most valuable currency, and he needed to earn that trust back not just from his clients, but from his employees and, more importantly, from himself. One morning, as he sat in his office overlooking the city, he was interrupted by a knock on the door. He looked up, expecting another meeting with the board or a call about the company's financials. Instead, it was Laura, his former confidant and now a key figure in the rebuilding process. "Alexander," she said, her voice steady but filled with an undeniable tension. "We need to talk." He motioned for her to sit. "What is it?" Laura handed him a folder filled with financial reports and market analysis. "We've stabilized the company. The investors are on board. But there's something you need to know. There are rumors, rumors that Adrian isn't completely gone. We thought we had wiped out his network, but it's possible that there's a secondary structure we missed. Someone is still pulling strings in the shadows." Alexander's eyes narrowed. Adrian Black is behind bars. Everything has been tied up. That's what we thought, Laura replied, her voice tight. But there are whispers in the market. People are moving money around in strange ways. It's almost like the game's still going on, just without his face attached to it. For a moment, Alexander sat back in his chair, considering her words. The weight of his earlier victory seemed hollow now. Had he truly won? Or was this just another illusion, another victory with strings attached? I need to find out who's behind this, he said finally. If Adrian's influence is still out there, I won't stop until I take down every last piece of it. As Alexander launched his investigation into the rumors, he discovered something unsettling. There were multiple shell companies, cryptic messages, and coded transactions that pointed to a shadowy network still alive and well. His victory over Adrian and Audrey had been only the surface of a far deeper conspiracy. The deeper Alexander dug, the more he realized that the game was far from over. What was even more disturbing was the growing realization that Audrey wasn't entirely out of the picture. She had vanished after her fall from grace, but something didn't sit right with him. Where was she? What was she planning? He spent days tracking down leads, reaching out to contacts, and following every piece of evidence. But with each new discovery, he felt like he was chasing ghosts. The deeper the rabbit hole went, the more he found himself questioning whether he was still in control, whether the control had slipped away long ago. Late one evening, as he sat alone in his office, Alexander received a message, one that would change everything. The message was simple, but it chilled him to the core. You never finished the job. Don't forget about me. It was unsigned. There was no hint of who had sent it, but Alexander knew instantly who it was from. Audrey. He slammed his hand down on the desk, frustration and anger boiling over. For months, he had thought the game was over. But Audrey was still playing. And if there was one thing he knew about her, it was that she was always several steps ahead. She had planned this from the beginning. It was clear now. Audrey had never truly left. She had been playing her own game all along, orchestrating a larger plan from the shadows. Alexander could feel her presence lurking behind every decision he made, every move he took. The truth was, she was always going to be a part of his life. No matter how much he wished otherwise, the next few weeks were a blur of secret meetings and tense negotiations. Alexander knew that in order to end this once and for all, he had to confront Audrey face. He could no longer afford to let her remain a mystery, lurking in the background. One evening, as he walked through the empty hallways of Blake Enterprises headquarters, he heard a soft voice from the shadows. Alexander, he froze. There she was. Audrey. She stepped out of the darkness, her eyes glinting with that familiar mixture of intelligence and danger. She looked different now, more composed, more controlled. But there was no mistaking it. She still had that same aura of power about her. I knew you'd come, she said softly. You can't resist, can you? Alexander's heart pounded in his chest. You thought you could get away with this, after everything you've done. Audrey smiled, a dark, almost pitying smile. I'm not the one who's been playing catch-up, Alexander. You still don't understand, do you? This is just the beginning. I'm done with your games, Alexander said, his voice hard. You've played your hand, and I've taken down everything you've built. It's over, is it? Audrey's smile never wavered. You're right about one thing. I've played my hand. But the game's never over. There's always another move. She stepped closer, her presence overwhelming. You think I've been trying to destroy you, Alexander. But in reality, I've been trying to free you. You never saw the truth. You never understood how to play this game, but now you're ready. What do you want, Audrey? Alexander demanded. She paused, studying him with those calculating eyes. What I want to know if you're ready to choose, because I'm done waiting. As Audrey's words hung in the air, Alexander stood at the precipice of a decision that would define the rest of his life. The company, the power, the war he had fought so long and hard for. Audrey was offering him a choice: to join her, to step into the shadows with her and seize a new world of power and influence, or to continue the fight, but risk losing everything, including himself. The choice was his. He took a step forward, eyes locked on Audrey, knowing that whatever he decided would change the course of everything.